And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. We're now switching our focus to recruiting, and this month and next month is going to be pretty big for Virginia. And I don't mean it's going to be 2 months full of commitments. I'm sure there'll be a couple kids who verbally commit to the program, but this is an opportunity for the staff to welcome players on grounds. That is big. A lot of these players didn't have the ability to meet the staff yet during the first junior days in January. And honestly, that staff, although they were focused on introducing themselves to a lot of in-state high school coaches, when they visit in January, they're not allowed to talk to these athletes in person. The only time they're allowed to talk to those 2023 athletes and 2024 athletes were when they visited on grounds. Some of these players were unable to visit them. So now this is the opportunity for this group of athletes to visit campus again, grounds, and for them to see these coaches in action. You can talk about how you practice, you can talk about your coaching style, but there's nothing better to show these athletes how you coach and your plan for your tenure as a Virginia head coach, as inviting them to a couple spring practice. Now I'm just going to pull up Why Was 24/7 here for a second. Now, if you are a subscriber to our site, you realize that we have been keeping you up to date with who is visiting grounds in the next few weeks and months here. We also are keeping track on who is visiting other schools as well, because that's very important. You need to know where these guys are visiting, not just when they're visiting UVA, but where they're visiting North Carolina, when they're visiting Penn State, because at the end of the day, it's not just about visiting UVA, it's about which other schools are trying to lure them to their respective campuses. And you will know who is visiting where by tracking our visits here on our message board, March, April visit schedule master list. This is available to our VIP subscribers. We also keep up to date with what the big board looks like as far as the 2023 class, and then obviously moving forward to a 2024 class. And here to help us break everything down as far as recruiting, we welcome National Recruiting Analyst Brian Dohn. Brian, thanks for coming in today.
Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure. You must have a slow week with spring break and everything to have me on.
How did you know it was spring break, Brian?
How do I know? Because I know I didn't have to track down any UVA visitors over the weekend.
That's true, but you're going to be really busy once March 22nd comes around. That's when UVA starts their spring practice. They have the big recruiting weekend on March 26th. But before we get to that, I want your opinion about this new staff. You know, in January, Virginia head coach Tony Allen and his staff really made a point that they were going to take back the state, and they really went all out to go and check out all these new high school coaches, meet them, introduce themselves. What was your initial impression of this staff and just how they handled that January period and just introducing themselves to those in-state high schools?
Yeah, I think first before you jump into what does it mean and everything, nobody knows what it means because you're 2-3 months in. Not even 3 months into Tony Elliott and his staff being in place at UVA, and there's always going to be people that pretend to know. Oh yes, they've made great inroads, or no, they're terrible. Nobody knows. But what they've done differently than the previous staff is, well, Tony Elliott is out there and visible in recruiting, and that's important because, as it's been well documented, when Bronco Mendenhall was there, he was not heavily involved with recruiting until kids got on campus. And his relationships, as I had a ton of recruits tell me, were built with the players in the program. So I think from that standpoint, Tony Elliott getting to schools in January was important. Now keep in mind, he can't get to schools again until the fall, when you can go out for eval days. So when everybody goes out in the spring and in late April and May, the head coach is not allowed out, which is a problem. So then the rest of the staff also went out, and they can have a different message just in terms of, listen, Virginia's important to us. Maryland, DC, that area is important, and you can really start laying the groundwork to what you can do. Because again, in January, the head coach can go to the school once, whereas the assistants could go once a week, and so it's more of, I don't want to say it's a grassroots approach because we're not that deep into it yet because you've only had a few weeks in January when the staff was fully in place. But so far, they're saying the right stuff. Their actions are the right things. But listen, Jackie, this is not recruiting 10 years ago. Recruiting now is show me. And the kids want to see it. The high school coaches want to see it. And it's show me what you can do for me. And I think those are the things that you're going to look for in the spring. And also, you bring up the big recruiting weekend that they're going to have in late March. And I think that's important from the standpoint of let's see how engaged Tony Elliott is then, because when kids were on campus in January, he didn't have practices to get ready for and a lot of the other stuff. So now it's more about can you balance the practice with meeting with the kids? I think one thing that programs like Virginia will make a mistake doing sometimes is having too many kids on campus to where, yeah, it was great, the atmosphere was good, but you don't get a lot of time with the coaches. It's different if you're going to Clemson or Penn State or Bama or Ohio State. It's a different kind of draw. So I think there's a lot left to be determined with how UVA is going to do things.
Yeah, I always say you win the introductory press conference and you always win that first national signing day. You always have that honeymoon period that everyone is excited about.
Yeah.
It's what happens. I think the true test for this staff is going to be the 2023 class, 2024 class, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, listen, 23 is an interesting class across the country because of the pandemic, when kids were allowed to visit starting June 1st, a lot of attention was paid to 22s. And even during the season, some 22s, you got some 23s. When you got to remember, when Tony Elliott got the job, it was right before signing day, if memory serves right. And so he didn't have anybody on campus in December. So then you spent the rest of December and January trying to recruit not only the 22 class, but also kids in your program to stay. I mean, we saw what happened on the offensive line with kids transferring. And so if you're UVA, you did not have a really good chance to build those bonds with 23s back in January. And so, yeah, you're going to start building those bonds now with the 23s. And this is your chance to kind of make some headway in the 24. So I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, it was actually my next question is because they are starting behind in the 2023 class. You can argue that Coach Hagens, Coach Sintum, and Coach 2J are three coaches that have already established some relationships with some of the guys they've recruited, but they also haven't reoffered a lot of the guys that they did offer previously. They're still evaluating some of these athletes. So when you look at the in-state guys, do you feel like there's going to be some struggles keeping some of those top in-state guys in the state of Virginia yet for that 23 class?
I mean, there's going to be struggles all the time with the way recruiting is now for Virginia and Virginia Tech to keep the top in-state guys in the state. You see more and more the balance between the top programs and everyone else. The gap just continues to widen with recruiting, with NIL, with kids that don't want to build programs but kind of just want to go in and try to win championships. And every kid who's recruited, and this goes for every Power 5 kid, they all think they're playing in the NFL, and so they want to go to these places where they can develop kids. And I always laugh about when I listen to kids say school X can develop kids, look how many they put in the NFL. And I get that that's a coaching pitch, but you think any of it has to do with the fact that maybe some of these programs are getting such elite talent that you don't really have to coach them up that much, you just have to show them technique. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. Again, this is the ACC at this point. Look, it didn't have a good year last year, right? And it's a what have you done for me lately kind of situation with recruiting. And so Tony Elliott and his staff are going to have to balance that out when you're just trying to bring in some of the top players. And it starts with getting kids to visit campus. It's important to get the top kids on campus so you can start selling the idea. And there's nothing better than those face-to-face relationships. So, but when we're talking about top talent in Virginia, I mean, I think if you're talking top 5 guys, that's usually going to be a challenge to get a couple of those any year, moving forward.
I think one guy in particular that people really want to know is Cam Seldon. He's such a talented athlete. He visited UVA, I believe, 2 to 3 times in the fall. He's got a really good relationship with Coach Higgins, but he also already has a crystal ball to Penn State. What is your feeling with Seldon, and how far do you think the Nittany, like, what's the gap between the Nittany Lions and everybody else?
I'm not going to sit here and say the gap is huge with it, but the competition is pretty high. He was at Maryland over the weekend, so the Terps got to speak with him. He was able to spend a lot of time with Gunter Bruther, the new wide receivers coach at Maryland. The connection with Penn State is, I believe, and boy, this may pain some UVA people to hear this, but I believe it's Penn State assistant Anthony Pondexter. I believe his brother used to work in the school, and so there's that connection to Seldon and the comfort level there. Um, I think in talking to Seldon, and I was at his school, and him and I text or DM, whatever we want to call it, a decent amount just on recruiting stuff. He hasn't been out to enough places to really have an idea on what he wants to do. If he runs track in the spring and puts up some of those numbers that you expect, I think some other programs will really come calling. It's a school that's off the beaten track. I mean, I remember I visited Nolan McConnell school, and then from there I went to go see Cam Seldon right after it. That was my next school. And I mean, it was like an hour and a half, hour 40, whatever it was to get to his school. So it's way out there. So you better be a special talent for schools to go make a trip that far. UVA, Virginia Tech, they'll do it because it's an in-state kid. But let's see how involved does North Carolina get. Does some of the Florida schools really push? Obviously, Penn State's there. Does Ohio State decide, yes, he can play for us? So I think a lot has to get worked out with him. I understand the crystal ball pick because Penn State, if you're sitting here right now, you would say they're the school to beat. But I also think there's a lot of time left for schools to catch up to him. But look, UVA's got to get him back on campus. Like you mentioned, he had visited previously in the fall, but now you just got to get him back for a spring practice and let him see what your new philosophy is and how things are different with the new staff.
Uh, my next question actually was going to be Nolan McConnell, since we both put in a crystal ball pick. He visited for a junior day visit in January. We both felt that it seemed like he was close to committing. I think the other school at that point was Penn State, ironically, as well, but it seemed like UVA was a team to beat. North Carolina just offered him. Um, do you feel like Nolan McConnell is the in-state Virginia recruit that we need to keep an eye on, or do you feel like this North Carolina offer could kind of change things for him?
Listen, I mean, I think when you get the offer from North Carolina, it'll give him a moment of pause, and he'll look at it. He's a smart kid who's going to be deliberate with what he wants to do. UVA has recruited him the best. They kept Garrett Tuja around, the offensive line coach at UVA, and so he has that strong relationship with them already. So, from my standpoint, and from talking to people, UVA is still in the driver's seat. And to be honest, this is a kid that UVA's got to close on, and it doesn't mean they have to close this week or next week. Just get him on board when he's comfortable making a decision. But everything has lined up for UVA to get him. And if Carolina's coming in at this point and able to make that big of an impact, then it tells you that McConnell wasn't fully sold on UVA and was looking somewhere else to begin with. But I don't get that sense. I still think UVA is the school to beat. Um, I know he visited Penn State. I don't sense that Penn State is pushing overly hard right now to get him. That could change if they go see him during the spring eval period and watch him work out and check what his flexibility is. But I still feel really good about that UVA pick.
When you look at the in-state guys, and even the guys, I always say people always make an effort to say in-state, in-state. I look at the 6 hour radius. I look at Maryland. I look at, some
Correct.
kids in Pennsylvania. Anyone that's in driving distance. When you look at that, which guys do you feel like UVA fans should really focus on? I know a few guys, obviously in Appomattox. Penix is one guy that I think UVA should keep an eye on. Though Virginia Tech is obviously one to watch there for. But who are some of the Virginia guys that kind of jumps out at you?
Well, I mean, for me, it doesn't go there yet, right? Because again, let's see who visits campus. one of the things about this past weekend with visits is everybody got a chance. Okay, Clemson had a huge junior day, right? Out on the West Coast, USC had a huge junior day. Um, that's what you're looking at where these kids are going because this class, everybody wants quick answers, but this class is, in my opinion, and I think if you look at the lack of commitments recently, this class is behind where you usually are in terms of commitments at this point for a class. And it goes back to what I said earlier. When June opened up last year, the focus was on 22s and yeah, some 23s. And for the high end schools, you know, who can pretty much pick and choose a lot of times, they were able to get ahead and get some 23s. But the 23 eval period, it's just getting ready to start for the most part because you didn't have a lot of camps, so you don't have a lot of testing numbers, especially so you look at a place like Virginia and you're looking at, you know, people want kids that play multiple sports. Well, if you're talking about that 6-hour radius with UVA, football played in the spring last year. Football played in the spring last year in North Carolina. Well, that means kids aren't running track. And so maybe you're a little less gung ho, or you want to wait for some of these kids to put up some track times, from the skill positions to see just exactly what you have from the speed element. And so to sit here and say, geez, is Tony Rojas, the linebacker from from Fairfax, is he involved? He was at Clemson this weekend. I think it's a stretch for UVA to get him. Yeah, Jonathan Penix, I like that too. But you got to see get to Tech, which I believe also was on break. They didn't have visitors. Before you start sitting there saying, well, who should they get or who can they get? Let's see who wants to visit because if you're talking Tech, UVA, Penn State with the spring breaks, not only did they not have visitors this weekend, but most places aren't going to have visitors next weekend either because everybody's just going to be getting back to campus on Saturday and Sunday. And you don't want to bring a kid on campus in the spring when there's no students around because it's just not a good experience. And then if you're getting ready to start spring practice, you might as well make sure they get up there for a spring practice and make it a full day. So, this goes back to what we spoke about earlier with Tony Elliott and the staff. You said they didn't reoffer a bunch of kids, and they've been very. They haven't offered a lot of kids, right? It's not like they're throwing out 20 offers a day, and so you have to also look at how who do they want? Can they get Joel Starlings from Richmond on campus? What kind of things can they do? Can they get Jordan Bass from Phoebus on campus? There's a lot of things that still have to play out instead of just saying, hey, these are who they're going to get. I mean, it's not. I don't see it working that way right now.
Yeah, it's been definitely a different type of cycle. And yeah, March
Yeah.
26th, like I said earlier on the podcast, that's the big recruiting weekend. That's the time where Cameron Fleming, Kieran Boyd, Ronnie Laura, and Fletcher Westfall, a big 2024 lineman, is set to visit
Yes.
UVA. And those are just a few names that we've already confirmed.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think Fletcher, Jacquie, wasn't Fletcher on? If memory serves right, I could have sworn he was on campus either late fall or maybe even in
He was.
January.
Coach 2J has done a good job
Right.
recruiting him as well, him and his family. Fletcher Russell
Right.
Osmond. He was set to
And,
actually visit during
and
January, but because they had that big official visit weekend with all the other old linemen visiting, Coach 2J and the family decided to wait until March so that
right.
he can have more time with them, which was a smart move.
And, no, it is. And you look at like Fletcher Westfall was at Rutgers this weekend, and he's a kid that's going to visit a ton of places, and there's a lot of he's going to have a ton of different options, and so the job, and this will be fascinating to watch. I mean, the job of the assistant coaches is to build the relationships, get these kids on campus, and then it's up to the head coach to close it out for the most part. So we'll see what happens there. We'll see. I feel like they'll get a lot of high quality players on campus, and if you don't, that's another issue when it's your first spring as a head coach. But I suspect that they'll have no problem getting top kids on campus. But it's then can you make them believe in UVA and the UVA education, that they can be successful in the ACC, recruiting the right kid? I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it, and I'm curious to see, and obviously you have a better handle, and I'd be curious on what your thoughts are, Jacquie. But you know, so Clemson was known for not giving out a ton of offers. And Brent Venables goes to Oklahoma, and I feel like there's a lot more offers going out at Oklahoma. Tony Elliott goes to UVA. I don't feel like there is just you know, a bunch of offers from UVA going out, and maybe you feel differently, but I'm curious to see the two dynamics and how that works on who's going to offer and who's not.
Yeah, actually, that's the one biggest thing I noticed. And actually, Anna Hickey, that covers Clemson, told me that Tony Elliott's belief is if you pick up an offer from me, that's a committable offer.
Right.
So he's very selective in an offer, and we've already seen that. He's not going to offer
Right.
you just to offer you. Even kids that had offers previously from UVA, they're still in evaluation mode. And I think
I do love the whole committable offer thing. Let me help everybody out with this committable offer thing. If you can't commit, it's not an offer. It's just talk. Simple as that.
it really is just like silent commits aren't commits until they're public, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's a unless I should say I'm a little more flexible on the silence, because it may, they may tell a coach, hey, I'm committed, but I'm waiting 2 weeks to announce on my dad's birthday or mom's birthday or grandma's birthday.
That's fine.
So the kid, but but I don't believe in I'm silently committed, but I'm going to make other visits. Now that's
Or
I'm in
6 months
agreement with
later,
you
you're
there.
still silent.
Yeah, I agree there. Yes.
Yeah, it's been that's the one thing that good thing you mentioned about that, because that's the biggest question I could get asked is why aren't there more offers out? And I think a lot of that's going to
Right.
happen during the spring because they really don't know what their rosters are going to look like. And with the transfer portal, there's going to be a lot more kids entering the transfer portal at the end of spring.
Yeah, and I really, you know what, Jackie, I really like the idea of UVA not throwing out a lot of offers. And here's why. I mean, I watch what goes on at, I'm based in New Jersey, so I watch what goes on at Rutgers. And in order to have a Rutgers offer, you have to get it from their head coach, Greg Schiano. The assistants do not offer, right? That's just the way it's set up. Whether you agree or disagree is fine, but that's the way it's set up. And so, from the Rutgers standpoint, their philosophy is, how do we make ourselves different? How do you differentiate Rutgers from other schools? Well, if you get an offer, it means you spoke with the head coach and he's the one extending the offer. And so you don't just have an assistant coach going to a high school and having the high school coach say, hey, I have this 2029 that you need to offer who's in third grade. He's going to be a guy. Can you offer him? And the assistant, oh, yeah, sure. He has an offer. So you don't have any of that stuff to where you walk into a school and, you watch it and you sometimes you see on Twitter, 6 kids from the school tweeting out an offer. And you're like, that kid has zero chance to play at that school on some of them. So I like the way UVA is doing it. It really makes their offer to me more meaningful, and hopefully they're able to convey that to the prospect, to the high school coach, and to the family to make it say, hey, listen, we may not have offered right away, but here's why, because we do it a different way than everybody else.
Again, it's when you bring up a good point. It's always about communicating with these high school coaches and
Yeah.
families about what's going on and keep that communication open. Because I think that's the one thing that Tony Elliott and his staff, as of right now, have done a good job of keeping those lines of communication open to a lot of the kids they have offered and are interested in. But Brian, you think my 4-year-old 2035 should not get an offer already to go to play football?
Well, it depends if he has Lewis's athleticism or your athleticism. And to be honest, Jackie, um, your poor children are growing up in a Chelsea household instead of a Liverpool
Did
household. So
Brian?
there's that.
Hold on, hold on. There you go.
Oh man. Ugh.
There you go,
Just
Brian.
stretching a little bit. Just stretching
Just
a little bit with you and your Chelsea scarf. That, hey,
yes.
Jackie, you should keep that, because that's going to be a collector's item. Your
You
grandkids are going to be like, "Hey, Grandma, wait, Chelsea was actually good at one point. Oh, they were in the Premier League. Oh, I hope they do well in League Two this year."
Brian, I should send a thank you card to all Liverpool fans, because if it wasn't for Liverpool losing 2-1 in 1990, I think in 1998, Chelsea would have been in Division 1.
Yeah. We like to
So,
do our part to help out the little clubs.
yeah, except, in the last few years, Chelsea have done a good job. You know what? So, Brian, I think this is a great point to end this conversation. Thanks for everything, Brian, and thanks for giving us a good insight on Virginia recruiting with us.
Appreciate it, Jack. Hey, Jackie, you were doing
Yes.
an incredible job on that site. So it's a pleasure coming on.
Thanks, Brian. Remember, we'll have a brand new episode of the Good Old Podcast on Tuesday. It'll be available on anywhere that you listen to your podcast. We are already on Apple and on Spotify. You can also see the video version of the podcast on our YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and also hit the bell so you are notified when a new episode has been loaded up. And make sure you also review and rate our podcast on Apple.